you everyone for coming today. We've got Peter Tatchell here, and just a little bit of housekeeping for you. I've got to tell you about the fire exits, I'm afraid. So they're here on the left, and the right will be there.
Yeah, we're delighted that the York Union and Durham College have been able to join forces tonight to bring you this event. Our guest will be known to many of you. He first came to the public eye in 1983 when he ran as the Labour candidate in the Bermondsey by-election.
He stood on a policy platform which was seen by many to be quite extreme at the time, which endorsed the national minimum wage, gay rights, and a comprehensive set of anti-discrimination policies. But all these years later, they form the backbone of today's political consensus.
His subsequent endeavours have included campaigning for equal marriage, and he is now attempting to open up civil partnerships to heterosexual couples. And if this wasn't enough, he's also attempted the citizen's arrest of Robert Mugabe for crimes against humanity.
Not once, but twice. We're going to be tweeting this event, so please do get involved. You know, tweet questions, you know, little factoids, anything you feel is appropriate. Hashtag Tatchell York. And we're going to have a wine reception after, so half an hour of talk and half an hour of Q&A session where you can literally ask Tatchell any question you like. So, and yeah, I think that's
Please join us in welcoming Peter Tatchell.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back in York. One of the last times I was here was for the General Synod of the Church of England in the building over there, where uninvited, myself and some other colleagues from Outrage entered the main debating chamber and proceeded to take over the event and gave the Archbishops of Canterbury and York a good dressing down over their stance on LGBT issues. They were a captive audience, so I think I probably harangued them for about half an hour, and I'm not sure it actually made much of an impact to them, but certainly some of the other people at the Synod were suitably influenced and subsequently contacted me to say that they were deeply ashamed of the Church's stance on LGBT issues, the Church's failure to support equality, and I think that is building a momentum within the Church towards change. And in many respects, the attitudes of the current Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Rolfe, are in part influenced by his own experience, but also by the social and community pressure that has arisen on the Church in recent years concerning its failure to endorse issues like marriage equality, even though the Church says it's in favour of marriage. Anyway, tonight's talk is around the theme of what next after same-sex marriage? What is left to do? What is the unfinished business for the LGBT community? I guess the starting point must, of course, be to acknowledge the huge positive changes that have taken place. I mean, we are living in a country today very, very different from Britain in the 1990s. When you think about it, until 1999, Britain had by volume the largest number of anti-gay laws of any country in the world. Some of those laws dated way back, not decades, but centuries. People think that homosexuality was legalized or at least decriminalized in 1967. Not so. First of all, that legislation only applied to England and Wales. It wasn't extended to Scotland until 1980, and not to Northern Ireland until 1982. And even then, most aspects of gay life remained criminalized. It's just that in certain narrow circumstances, the law was not enforced. But all those historic laws remained on the statute book. They remained on the statute book under the heading of, quote, unnatural offences. That's how the penal code describe same-sex relationships, unnatural offences. And, you know, I'm sure you're all familiar with the case of Oscar Wilde, jailed in 1895 under the so-called gross indecency law. Again, the language is resonant with prejudice. He was jailed for 2 years for the crime of gross indecency. That law remained on the statute book after 1967, and in fact was not repealed until 2003. In addition, the law against anal sex, or anal intercourse, which was passed in 1533 during the reign of King Henry VIII, was not repealed until 2003. So you get a sense that, you know, the ending of criminalization is a very recent phenomenon. In terms of a penal code that does not discriminate, we've only had it for 11 years. It's only since 2003, with the Sexual Offences Act, that we've finally had a criminal code that does not distinguish or discriminate on the grounds of sexual orientation. And of course, there have been many, many other changes since 1999, beginning that year with the end to the ban on LGBT people serving in the armed forces, and then proceeding to end the unequal age of consent, to equalise it at 16 for everyone, to repeal Section 28, the ban on so-called promotion of homosexuality by local authorities, the introduction of legislation to allow same-sex couples to foster and adopt children for the first time, the introduction of laws to protect LGBT people, firstly against discrimination in the workplace, and then later against discrimination in the provision of goods and services. We also, of course, had the introduction of civil partnerships in 2004, 2005, and a number of other positive changes as well, including the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, which allowed transgender people, for the first time in law, to change their sex on official documents like passports and so on. So all these changes have happened within a very short space of time. Since 1999, we have gone from being the country in the world with the largest number of anti-gay laws to being one of the most progressive countries. And that is a huge tribute to LGBT people across the country, and of course, very importantly, to our straight friends and allies who've marched and campaigned with us. So I think I'd like you to join me in giving a big cheer or round of applause to everyone. I think I'd probably say that if you look at it, this huge scale of gay and lesbian, bisexual and transgender law reform since 1999 has probably been the fastest, most successful law reform campaign in British history, and possibly even in world history. To repeal so many discriminatory laws in such a short space of time is unprecedented in the history of this country, and as far as I know, of any other country as well. So that is a stupendous achievement. But of course, as the title of this talk suggests, there is still unfinished business. We're not quite there yet. Same-sex marriage. You know, at last we have the right of same-sex couples to marry the person they love. But it's not equality. You know, it was pitched as equal marriage or marriage equality. But what we've ended up with is not true equality at all. We now have two separate marriage laws. We have the 1949 Marriage Act, which is for straight couples, and we have the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act of 2013, which is for same-sex couples. So we have two separate marriage laws. We have segregation in law when it comes to marriage, and that segregation is based upon sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, call me ungrateful or nitpicking, but to me, it's a very important fundamental democratic principle that we should all be equal before the law. Most people would not tolerate black or Asian people or Jewish or Muslim people being segregated under a special marriage law. They would find that deeply, profoundly offensive. And it is, or it would be. So why on earth have we been put out in this separate, segregated marriage legislation? It is redolent of the kind of laws they had in South Africa. Not, of course, the apartheid political and violent repression, but in terms of the legal system of South Africa during apartheid, it was about separate laws for black and white people. What we have today is separate marriage laws for straight and LGBT people. Separate is not equal. Separate is not equal. True equality is everyone having rights and responsibilities under the same law. Now, another big issue, of course, with same-sex marriage law is that it perpetuates inequality in terms of pension inheritance in the event of one partner dying. The same inequity that exists in civil partnerships. When civil partnerships were introduced in 2004-2005, the government wrote into them that same-sex civil partners could not have the same pension inheritance rights as opposite-sex married couples. And that distinction has been transferred over to the new same-sex marriage law as well. What it means, for example, is if you're in a straight marriage under the 1949 Marriage Act, and let's say, for simplicity's sake, you got married next year, and both of you have been paying into your pension pot since, say, 1980. If one partner dies, the surviving partner will be able to inherit their deceased partner's pension with all the contributions going back to 1980. But if you're in a same-sex marriage or a same-sex civil partnership, by law, you can only inherit your partner's pension dating back to 2005. So if your partner, if your deceased partner had been paying to their pension pot from 1980, the surviving partner will lose 25 years of pension contribution. Now that is manifestly unjust. In response to protests, and to all of you who have protested about this issue, the government is going to review it. But we don't know what that review will entail. The other issue is, of course, that the same-sex marriage law introduces an explicit legal ban on the Church of England and the Church of Wales conducting same-sex religious marriages, even if they wish to. So right now, they're not going to change their policies, but let's say that in 2 or 3 years' time, the Church of England and the Church of Wales decide that they want to give the right of same-sex couples to marry in their places of worship. The law will prevent them. The law says the church is not allowed to. And that is not only homophobic, it's also an attack upon religious freedom. Because it's saying that these two churches are not entitled to make their own decisions about who they marry. The other issue, of course, is with transgender people. There is the so-called spousal veto, which gives a couple where one person in the relationship, in the marriage, is trans, if that person wants to officially change their gender, get a gender recognition certificate, it means that their spouse has a veto over whether or not they can do that, or whether or not the marriage can continue. And again, I think that's a very unfair, unjust thing. Of course, partners in a relationship need to negotiate and agree their own arrangement, but that should be between them and not a state imposition. The other issue, of course, is that although the government did legislate same-sex marriage, it is still refusing to this day to legislate equal civil partnerships. So under the civil partnership legislation, same-sex couples can have a civil partnership, opposite-sex couples are banned, and that ban has remained. There was an attempt in Parliament to render that anomaly no longer applicable, in other words, to allow opposite-sex couples to have a civil partnership if they wish, but the government made an entirely fatuous case that this would delay the legislation, be too costly, etc., and as a result the MPs concerned withdrew their amendment. But to me, equal civil partnerships is just as important as equal civil marriage. There should be the right of straight couples to have a civil partnership if they wish. To ban them by law is just as offensive as the previous ban on same-sex marriage. So we're now in a situation where the government has, from January to April this year, conducted a public consultation exercise to determine the future of civil partnerships. And it set out 3 options in that public consultation: to completely abolish civil partnerships and force existing civil partners to transform into marriages, even if they don't want to have a marriage. Under one of the proposals, they'd be forced by law to transfer their status to a marriage. The second option would be to retain existing civil partnerships, but not allow any new ones. And the third one is to keep civil partnerships and extend them to heterosexual couples as well. Now, that is the option that has majority public support. Because when the government consulted on same-sex marriage in 2012, at my request, and I think to humour me, the government did include a question about should civil partnerships continue, and if so, should they be open to opposite-sex couples? And the result of that public consultation, which generated the biggest response of any public consultation in British history, was that over 60% of the public supported the retention of civil partnerships and the extension of them to opposite-sex couples. Only 24% disagreed. So already there was a very clear public mandate for equal civil partnerships. But nevertheless, because the government didn't like the result, it introduced a new consultation. It wasn't happy with that result, so it organised this year for a second consultation in the hope that it might get a different result. I don't know, but I'm just really, really hoping that there will be a reaffirmation of public support for equal civil partnerships. But the big worry is the level of public responses to the public consultation was very, very small by comparison to the public consultation on same-sex marriage. So it's really too close to call on what the results of the consultation will be, and even if the consultation goes in favour of equal civil partnerships, whether the government will accept that. And just very recently, Sajid Javid, the minister in charge, has indicated the government is not yet decided on what to do. And we probably won't get a result from the government until later this year. My question is, why are they hanging around? It doesn't take very long to tally up the results of the public consultation, which finished in early June. It doesn't take very long to tally up those results and make them public and then come to a decision. I don't see why we're required to wait until they say the autumn or even the end of the year. So my suggestion would be is when the result does come out, and if the government does propose legislation, please lobby your Member of Parliament to get them to support equal civil partnerships. Straight people supported the battle for same-sex marriage. We have a moral duty to support their battle for equal civil partnership. And some people say, well, why would a straight couple want to have a civil partnership? Well, of course, many straight couples, perhaps a minority, but a significant minority, don't like the sexist, patriarchal history of marriage. And to be honest, neither do I. I've championed same-sex marriage since 1992, but I personally wouldn't want to get married. I share the feminist critique. To me, the historical baggage that goes with marriage means it's not for me. But as a Democrat and a campaigner against homophobic discrimination, of course I wanted to see equality before the law and the repeal of a discriminatory ban. So, you know, when it comes to marriage, if you look at it, and you look at it clearly and with open eyes, you will know that marriage was never originally about love. It was all about male power and property. Marriage was introduced to ensure the male sexual control of women and to ensure inheritance of property through the male line from father to son. So marriage was a way of guaranteeing, as far as possible, proper paternity for the inheritance of property from one man to another. Even the language of marriage, husband, an alternative meaning is to manage and control. To husband something is to manage and control it, which of course symbolizes the way many men, not all men, but many men treated their wives in marriages, to manage and control. Likewise, we still have the symbolism of the father of the bride giving away his daughter to the husband-to-be. Again, symbolically representing the passing of women from one man to another. And even when it comes to the actual marriage license today, the law requires the father's name to be put on the marriage certificate, but not the mother's. So these are some of the reasons why I would not want to get involved with marriage. I would not want to get married myself. But I will defend the right of others to do so if they wish, with the reminder, with marriage often comes D-I-V-O-R-C-E and P-A-L-I-M-N-O-Y, divorce and alimony. But that's the decision for people to make for themselves. You know, we do, I think, need to acknowledge that, you know, the new same-sex marriage law is an important advance, despite all these faults and flaws. But to go back to my question about civil partnerships, in the Netherlands, they've had both civil partnerships and civil marriages open to everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, for over a decade. For over a decade. Originally, civil partnerships were introduced in the Netherlands for same-sex couples. But they are open to everyone. And today, the majority of Dutch civil partnerships are between straight men and women. And nearly 2/3 of Dutch civil partnerships are between heterosexual men and women. I think that that indicates that if civil partnerships were available to straight couples in Britain, we'd see a similar substantial take-up. It may not be exactly the same because there's obviously some difference in our culture with the Dutch, but I think, you know, it indicates that there is likely to be a significant, if minority demand. Maybe 10% or 15% of opposite-sex couples would choose, if they had the option, a civil partnership. And that is their right. So that's why civil partnerships should be open to straight couples. First of all, the principle of equality before the law, and secondly, because there is a significant number of people who would like to take them up. In terms of other issues beyond the whole debate around civil partnerships and civil marriages, what is left? Well, you know, we have some great equality laws, some very, very good equality laws, but all of them have limited qualified exemptions for religious organizations. Not just places of worship, but also faith-run schools, hospitals, nursing homes, and shelters for the homeless. In certain circumstances, if they can demonstrate that it's against their religious ethos, they are allowed to refuse to employ an LGBT person. Or they're allowed to refuse to serve an LGBT person. Now, although I disagree in the sense that I'm not religious, I will defend the right of people of faith to hold their belief and to not be subject to any form of discrimination. All I'm asking for is reciprocation. Why should religious organizations be able to discriminate when no one else in society is permitted to do so? Why should they be above the law? Why should they be able to continue to discriminate when others cannot? So that's something that has to change. You know, discrimination is not a religious value. Now, I am no great theologian, but when I look at the holy texts, you know, love and compassion is the overriding ethos or value that comes out of those teachings. And love and compassion is not compatible with discrimination. So it does have to change. Another issue is homophobic and transphobic bullying in our schools. We know from research that over 50% of LGBT young people say they suffered homophobic or transphobic bullying when they were at school, ranging from name-calling and teasing to threats, menaces, jostling, and even outright physical violence in the classroom and in the playground. That is truly, truly shocking. Truly shocking. At the same time, we also know that half of all schools have no anti-bullying program that specifically addresses homophobic and transphobic bullying. Half of them don't. Now, you know, a school should be a place of safety. A school should be a place where young people go and don't have to worry or fear that they're going to be bullied and teased and even physically assaulted. You know, no form of prejudice, whether it be racism or anti-Muslim prejudice or anti-Semitism, no form of prejudice should be acceptable in our schools. And although most schools now take a much tougher line and do much more, perhaps not quite enough, but do much more to challenge racism, there is not the parallel commitment to tackle homophobia and transphobia. And it's therefore no surprise that we have extraordinarily high rates of depression and suicidal thoughts among many LGBT people. The rates of depression and suicidal thought is 3 to 4 times higher among LGBT young people than the general young youth population. Same with actual self-harm and attempted suicide, much, much higher rates among young LGBT people. And it's partly to do with perhaps family rejection, partly to do with bullying in schools. And it does really show that, you know, this is something that has to be tackled. It really is very important to tackle it. And I would argue that we need a new approach, a new, much more robust approach to all forms of prejudice in schools. I'd like to see lessons in equality and diversity in all our schools, from the very first year of primary education, ongoing throughout a child's school life, to tackle not just homophobia and transphobia, but racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim prejudice, disableism, misogyny, the whole range of prejudice. And why do I say that? Well, we know that children are not born bigoted. They become bigoted because of the bigoted influences of adults and their peers. Education against prejudice can play a really important, significant role. And where it has been tried in some schools, it does result in lower levels of prejudice, greater cohesion and solidarity between pupils. So, you know, I really think that the Education Secretary needs to make equality and diversity lessons a compulsory part of the curriculum in every school, not just state schools, but state-funded schools, including faith schools, academies, independent schools, free schools. They should all have a requirement to conduct these lessons. Because, hopefully, we all want to live in a society where everybody is valued and respected, where there is good community relations and social cohesion. And with all the fuss now about extremism in some schools, this is precisely why we need equality and diversity education. That's a way to tackle extremism, whatever the extremism may be, from the far right, from Islamists, from whoever. That extremism needs to be challenged. And it can be challenged, and could be challenged, if those lessons were introduced. Very quickly, other big issues we face are the way in which LGBT refugees fleeing persecution in countries like Russia, Iran, Uganda, and so on. They are often failed by the asylum system. They are disbelieved, refuse asylum, and earmarked to be sent back to the country they come from. What a terrible, terrible negation of our responsibilities under the Refugee Convention. You know, we've signed up to that convention to give people with a genuine fear of persecution a safe haven. Yet the rate of refusal for LGBT refugees is much, much higher than the average rate of refusal. Albeit that all asylum seekers find incredible obstacles and hurdles put in their way to a successful claim. For example, the government has cut the funding for asylum cases to a level where no solicitor can prepare a proper case. Many refugees are put in asylum detention centres, so effectively glorified prisons, and fast track. That is given 2 weeks, about 2 weeks, to make their application and do an appeal, and if they fail, be whisked out of the country. Well, no one can prepare a proper asylum case in 2 weeks. It's impossible to get the written evidence, the corroboration, the documentation. Many of these people have been tortured, so you need to get medical evidence. You need to get corroboration if they've been imprisoned or arrested. This takes many, many weeks or even months. But the fast track system and the detention system is deliberately designed to fail as many asylum seekers as possible. Not just LGBT asylum seekers, but all asylum seekers. Because the government is marching to the tune dictated by UKIP and the Daily Mail. So genuine refugees are treated as birds and disbelieved. We also have a big issue with ongoing homophobic and transphobic hate crime. A third of all LGBT people have experienced some form of homophobic hate crime in recent years, ranging from mere teasing and insults and verbal abuse to actual physical assault. Again, this is unconscionable. And just the other day in London, you know, a man leaving a gay club was assaulted, he had ammonia squirted in his eyes, and may even lose the sight of one eye in a vicious homophobic attack outside a gay club. The final issue I'd raise is that, of course, you can have equality in law, but it's not necessarily very effective if that equality is not interpreted and enforced. And just to give you an example, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the lyrics of some reggae and dancehall artists from Jamaica, where they openly advocate the killing of LGBT people. They urge the shooting, burning, hanging, and drowning of LGBT people. None of those artists has ever been prosecuted, even though incitement to murder is a very, very serious criminal offence. In fact, they've been given visas and work permits to perform in this country by both the previous Labour government and the current Lib Dem Conservative coalition. No one who advocated killing black people or Jews would be given a visa or a work permit. They'd be banned. I'm sure you're all familiar with Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam in the United States. As far as I know, he's never advocated violence against anyone. But he's been banned from this country for over 2 decades. So how come he's banned and these murder music singers are not? It's double standard. Likewise, some years, about 10 years ago, Sheikh Abdul al-Faisal urged the murder of Hindus and Jews. He was promptly arrested, prosecuted, and jailed for 9 years. Around the same time, Imam Abdul Muhid in East London advocated exactly the same, the killing of LGBT people. He wasn't even taken to court, despite 4 witnesses coming forward who testified and heard his incitement to homophobic murder. So there is real double standards in the way the law is sometimes enforced. But nevertheless, bring it all in perspective, we have achieved some fantastic gains. There is unfinished business, but there's a lot of business that has been done successfully. That's in Britain. Of course, around the world, the picture is much, much more bleak, with more than 70 countries, nearly 80 countries, still criminalising homosexuality, with penalties ranging from just a few years imprisonment right up to life imprisonment, and even in several countries, execution. Can you believe it? The death penalty for same-sex relations in the 21st century. More than half of these countries belong to the Commonwealth. 80% of Commonwealth nations still criminalise homosexuality. 80%. 42 out of 53 member states still criminalise homosexuality. 7 of them have life imprisonment. Life imprisonment. And 2 of them, Pakistan and Nigeria, in certain regions have Sharia law where gay people can be put to death. This is the Commonwealth of Nations, headed by the Queen, which has a charter that pledges equality and non-discrimination for all Commonwealth citizens, including, by interpretation, although not explicitly written, including, according to the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, including LGBT. It shows that there is still much work to be done. And of all the different issues that I've discussed tonight, solidarity and support for LGBT people in countries where there is tyranny and homophobic persecution is an absolute moral duty. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with those many, many brave, heroic activists in countries around the world who, despite the risk of imprisonment and even murder, are fighting for LGBT rights. They are real human rights heroes. And they are the people who will help push forward the process that will lead us to a situation where one day we all shall be free. One day, every LGBT person on this planet will be free. It may take many decades, even centuries to come, but one day we all will be free. So let's work together to help make homophobia and transphobia history. Thank you.